Today, it is my great pleasure to be speaking to John MacMahon of Cytokind. And John and I had what was meant to be a brief conversation last week, one of those 10-minute calls that ends up being over an hour. And we discovered that we have a mutual fascination for light. I am going to say at the outset that this is not a paid spot. No money has changed hands. So yes, John does run a company that sells a product. I'm not in possession of that product. I don't profit from selling that product. John is not paying me for having this conversation, but what John is about to tell you about light and about the healing benefits of light is something that I think is really important. So, John, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself? Just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in this whole light caper.
Thank you, Robin, for that intro. And I really love talking about this. So I hope that if there's anything that comes across to your listeners is, I really care about this. I think this can make a big difference for people. And you don't have to buy a light. Our company is based in the US, so we can introduce you to people that have lights in Australia or other countries. But we're really, really fundamentally trying to advance the education and the opportunity to use sunlight and its surrogate in narrowband UVB for really fundamental human health. Really happy to talk to your folks. My background is I was super fortunate to be at Stanford University in the late 90s, getting a master's degree in electrical engineering and one in biomechanical engineering, and thinking, boy, I'm not sure I'm really going to do either one of these things.
They're both really tough courses.
It was, but yes, and my grades will reflect that. But what happened really to be fortuitous was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Paul Yock said, we should start taking engineers and having them follow doctors and nurses and clinicians so they can solve issues that need engineering input. And that became a program called Biodesign. And we were the test bunnies, a group of us. And that program now is a global program, really changing healthcare around the world. And I don't want to start any conversation that I don't tip my hat to the Stanford Biodesign program, which was fundamentally looking at getting better outcomes at better prices to help offload the burden of the healthcare costs while improving the outcomes. And Cytokind fits exactly in that calculus.
Gotcha. And healthcare costs, of course, being just completely out of control in the US. I think last time I looked, it was 18% of GDP that the US is spending on so-called healthcare, which in the main has got nothing to do with health. And I love what you're describing there, this idea of cross-pollination. So the greatest innovations of science have happened when people who are trained in one particular field kind of move into a different field and make observations about that new field that have not been conditioned by the accepted state of knowledge about that field. So they see things that people actually trained in it cannot see because the people trained in it have been trained within a paradigm. So that's that anecdote about how you came to get involved in this is really fascinating. So what was the observation that you made that caused you to get involved in light as therapy?
Well, the seminal work that I was introduced to was sort of 10 years into my career of looking at solutions, making inventions, taking them to doctors, getting them FDA approved. We were sort of doing that cycle, right? And that process, a fellow student named Evan Anderson got psoriasis, which is the primary skin condition where light is the therapy. So we'll touch on the dermatological basis. And he looked up how to treat psoriasis, and he looked up how they do it at the Mayo Clinic. And since he had been through our program, he said, I think I could do that at home. I could get some LED lights. I could make this compound up. I could just treat myself. And he did. And he cured himself. He showed the Mayo Clinic, and they became his first investor. And
Wow.
and so he's a young guy, dedicated, solving his own issues. I joined his board as sort of the mentor of the process. And I thought at the time, which many people do, that you take narrowband UVB light and you shine it on the lesion of psoriasis, and you heal from the top down. And the nuance that he had done is he says, I'm going to treat one spot at a time. And so we set up other spots on people's bodies would be a control, placebo. And at the end of the trial, we reached out to the patients to say, okay, now we're going to give you the treatment for your other spots. So the spots that we had treated got treated conservatively with light therapy and a patch at a rate faster and as successful as Humira, which at the time was before Ozempic, so the number one drug in the world. You could treat this yourself. So when we talked to the patients, they said, oh, you don't need to send me stuff for my other spots because I'm slowly healing in the other spots, which we had not shined lights on.
Yes. So you had given them essentially some kind of placebo device so that they could not tell which was the active device that was transmitting this particular narrowband and which was not. Have I got that story correct?
Yeah. So we'd sit on the lesion, and it had a fan, but you couldn't see the light when it was turned on. So the placebo would turn the fan on, so it would sound like it was working, right? But so good science.
Yeah. They're very difficult to design for devices. I mean, they're actually difficult to design. It can be difficult to design a placebo even for a drug that you take orally, but for devices, that's some real engineering brilliance coming up with a placebo device. Okay, so just I think most people are familiar with psoriasis, but just to fill in the gaps for anyone who's not familiar, so this is an autoimmune skin disease that results in what are called plaques. It's got a scaly appearance, almost like fish scales, and these can appear throughout the body. And so traditionally, the treatment has been to apply some kind of medicament, usually starting with a cortisone-based product to the lesions, and then the development in medical treatment was Humira, which is a biologic treatment. Incredibly expensive, or at least it was when it first came on the market. And so your innovation was to provide a device that transmitted a very particular spectrum of, or a particular portion of the spectrum of light, so shall we just pop on our slideshow here so that you can point out where it is? Yeah, let me just pop this on. Whoops, and we're at the end. Let's go through to the front. Okay, so this then is the spectrum of light, or the energy that we get from the sun, correct?
Yeah, so this is the light spectrum. At the bottom are nanometers of wavelengths for nerds keeping score at home. We've adapted phenomenally to sunlight, right? We can't live without it. The visible light spectrum, which is sort of the Roy G. Biv that we see, which is on the right half, we've adapted to see with that. So, we evolve rather intimately with the sunlight, since that's where all our vision is. Infrared, so when you talk about an infrared sauna, that's to the right of that. So that's longer wavelength. And then where we are is where the arrow is down below. This is narrowband ultraviolet B. The ultraviolet spectrum is the spectrum where your body has a really dynamic response, your skin does. And dermatologists over decades have found that the sweet spot of the best benefit and the least burn is narrowband UVB. And that's, just a few nanometers wide out of this 800 nanometer spectrum. And we just leveraged that. So Evan invented that work. The data that the patients were healing in other locations was the kernel that started Cytokind, which was, wait a minute, we're not healing from the top down. What is going on? And the data shows that you absorb the sunlight, it calms your inflammation. Like I said, psoriasis is autoimmune, runaway inflammation manifesting in the skin, and then you heal from the inside out. And that was the real aha moment for us.
And by aha moment, that was the moment at which you realized that light was this particular narrowband spectrum of light. It was being absorbed through the skin, and it was affecting biological processes in a very systemic or you might say central manner. In other words, it was not merely acting topically. Although you did say that your psoriasis patients, let me see if I understood what you said correctly. Your psoriasis patients, the lesions that actually did get the active treatment, the active light device, they healed faster than the lesions that had placebo. I understood that correctly. Good. Okay. But nonetheless, those lesions that were getting the placebo light treatment, the device that didn't actually emit any light, they were still healing, but not as fast.
Yes. And you bring up a great point there. So there are certainly people that were specialists in the world that knew this. I didn't know this, right? This was educational to me. But when we asked them where they were healing, because we had pictures of their bodies, and what we realized is they were healing in the pattern of their lymphatic drainage system.
Wow. Okay.
And so the mediator was looking like it was lymphatic. And as we became educated in the specialist in the field, we're covered with a bunch of cells in our epidermis, which is the thickness of a dime here in the US, a very thin layer of skin that this wavelength penetrates. But it has nitric oxides, it has pre-vitamin D, right? People think of sunlight on their skin as vitamin D, but there's this myriad of other photoactive elements in our skin. And many of them, once they're activated by this wavelength, they migrate into the lymphatic drainage lymph nodes. And there they educate your body as to what the environment your skin is seeing. And so it feeds the immune system. And whatever, if you have poison ivy or, if you have a bee sting, all of that is, your immune system, the front line is your skin, biggest organ in your body. And so it was this communication, this feeding of the immune system that has really just been something we've been chasing on the research side and the education side. And then that company, what happened as we got FDA approval with that, handheld device, for at home, is we got FDA approval and COVID came and the investors left because they're like, what's going to go on now? So that company did not live through the start of COVID, but we had this concept in our head, like, this is really provocative. And we're in the healthcare business on the device side, but we wanted to get in the COVID fight too. And so we looked at what was really going on, that this wavelength of light was systemically, broadly calming the immune system in psoriasis patients. We found in the literature it was in graft versus host. in vitiligo and eczema. And so that there's those dermatological conditions, they all get treated with a different drug, but these lights transcend them. And so we're thinking, well, this must be upstream of the drugs, like your TNF, Humira, TNF inhibitor, which is really just managing a symptom, a perfect drug from a drug company, because the problem never goes away. You need the drug
forever. Yeah.
That's perfect. So, so we got in the fight. We said, if this is true, and so we partnered, we reached out to the global leader in lights, which is Davlin is their trade name in Australia, Fothera in the US. And we reached out to them with this crazy idea that we'd get in the COVID fight by bringing these lights in into the fight. So this is pre-vaccine, and we partnered with a group out of LSU and Baylor Infectious Disease, and we brought these lights over super sick patients. Right?
Okay.
So we made a placebo light.
Hospitalized patients. So 30 hospitalized high-risk COVID patients. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got a placebo group that's just getting something that doesn't transmit light.
Well, we actually have the lights we use, which when we get into the actual lights, these we had to put over the patients, and those have a plexiglass screen. And there is a type of plexiglass that looks exactly the same but absorbs the UV.
Got it.
We had a real placebo. We didn't tell the clinicians which was which. So we looked to see, could we, if the hypothesis was true, right? Because the risk in COVID is that your immune system overreacts.
This is the cytokine storm that was much talked about in that first year or so, where so a cytokine storm essentially meaning that your immune system, which is supposed to respond to infection in an inflammatory manner, but once the infection has been brought to heal, then the immune system is meant to stand down. And in a cytokine storm, it doesn't get that stand down message. And so the inflammatory response ramps up and the person becomes very, very ill.
Yeah. And we look at it in most of the cases that we looked at, right, is the lungs fill up with inflammation, your oxygen levels go down, and the wheels start coming off, right? Mm-hmm. So that's how we came up with the name Cytokind. We changed from ending with an E. We thought we would try to get them to calm down. And so Cytokind was the name we came up with. And,
I love it.
And we were super impressed, right? So we reduced the 28-day mortality. So I've done maybe 8 clinical trials in different cardiovascular things. I'd never had mortality as an endpoint, but we did 28-day mortality, and we reduced it more than half.
Yes.
Which was profound, right? And the vaccine is just becoming in existence. We have this great data, but one thing the group from Baylor said to us, which was really interesting, he said, if people think this is vitamin D, that they're going to think, or he described his research colleagues as saying the following: whether I read any vitamin D paper or not, my mind is already made up, right? You either think it's amazing or you think it's snake oil. So when we were designing the trial, we said, okay, we're going to do serial blood draws, and we're going to look at cytokines and metabolites. We're going to look at fundamental inflammation instead of just vitamin D.
Yes.
And so that, when we showed the US government these results with the lights, they're like, what did you do? You just shine lights on them. I'm like, yep, it's an ancient technique that's, we got a new virus. This is what the data says. So we got a grant to do very sophisticated profiling of the blood draws that we had. because we had a serial blood draw and we had a placebo and a control group of super sick patients.
Yep.
And when when we were learning and getting educated about who's interested in this, who are the real experts, we found Professor Prue Hart from Telethon Kids in Perth, Australia. And she had done this in a particular set of patients who are known to be really sunlight impacted. And those patients are multiple sclerosis patients. And we wouldn't be anywhere without her work. And she heard what we were up to. We were amazed. She had done the biggest, most intense trial, and she's an immunologist. So an MS patient is seen by a neurologist. Prue is an immunologist, and she's going to give them a dermatological treatment.
That's cross-pollination, which is, again, exactly what we need. Yeah. Because of course, there are so many different autoimmune conditions. And if you have MS, you see a neurologist. If you have psoriasis, you see a dermatologist. If you have rheumatoid arthritis, you see a rheumatologist. And so you're seeing all these different specialists. Of course, many autoimmune patients have more than one autoimmune condition. You might have vitiligo and Hashimoto's thyroiditis and Crohn's disease, and celiac disease, I should say. And you might have Crohn's as well, for that matter. And so you're seeing all these different specialists, and no one's asking the question, hey, is there anything upstream that might be driving this?
And that's how we found each other, Robin, right? Was this commonality that there is, maybe you have systemic inflammation that you can't control, and then your epigenetics, your environment, and your genetic risk factors make you get rheumatoid arthritis or MS or psoriasis. But there's you just haven't stabilized your inflammation. And when you look at patients self-selected by the fact that they've survived to 90 or 100 years old, if you look at their immune profile, they have very low baseline inflammation. And so very stable. So they get an insult, they get a flu, the immune system rises up and returns back. And a signature upon all autoimmune by definition is it gets excited and it doesn't go back down. It gets excited again and it doesn't go back down. And it just runs hot. So the only way when you look that these diseases, MS, pancreatic cancer, type 1 diabetes, also pancreas impacted, tuberculosis, all of these have a signal of latitude dependence. And latitude dependence means the further away you are from the equator, the worse, either the more prevalence and the worse outcomes. In the US, if you cut the US in half, the multiple sclerosis rate is double in the upper half than it is in the lower half. If you then go to Canada, it's 3 times that rate, right? And so MS has the most to teach us because it has the strongest signal. So
yeah. We see that very much so in Australia too, where if you spend the first 15 years of life in the Northern Territory or in Queensland, your lifelong risk of MS is, I think it's about 1/3 as much as if you spend the first 15 years of your life in Tasmania. I might be a bit off on the numbers, but that's the general trend of things. And it does seem to be where you spend your childhood, as opposed to, if you were born in if you're born in Tasmania and then later in life you move to the Northern Territory, you don't get that advantage. Although I'm not sure whether that's true of severity of MS.
So Tasmania is 7 times the prevalence of the closer part of Australia. So I mean that's a huge signal. So
That's huge.
And then the Orkney Islands in Scotland. Scotland is the worst in the Northern Hemisphere, and the Orkney Islands is the worst in Scotland. So it's in both hemispheres. But, do you want to talk about that? Sunlight in Australia. Let's just talk about the youth aspect, right? Because you have a generation, maybe a generation and a half since the ozone hole, since slip, slap, slop, who have been denied sunlight.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the nuances in the literature now is your immune system's strength, flexibility, strength, however you want to talk about it, is carried over from your youth. And people might say, well, what's going on? Well, the same way you have puberty sexually, your immune system also matures at about the same time. So you have the immune system you're born with, which has as many cells as the night sky. I mean, there are so many immune cells in your body. And then as you go preteen, your body makes an adaptive immune system. And that has 10 times as many cells in it. And that is that we think is one of the keys, that if you're stimulating the system by having peanut butter, by eating dirt, by swimming in the river, by stimulating your immune system and feeding it with sunlight, that's the intersection. At least it's the logical intersection. So to end up with a strong, flexible immune system.
Yeah, and so this really overlaps so neatly with the hygiene hypothesis, which was put up some decades ago now to explain or to attempt to explain this phenomenon whereby as we see infectious disease recede, as countries develop economically, we see an increase in allergic disease and in autoimmune disease. And it's, people just not being exposed to enough challenge of their immune systems in their youth. And so you're saying, well, yes, that also applies to sunlight. So, okay.
Well, we're thinking that the test, the things you're exposed to environmentally, your body, that's an education that you'll carry for your life. And to fuel it, we just need sunlight to be the fuel to drive it, right? To really communicate with your lymphatic system. What's going on? We think of it as a muscle, right? Your immune system. If you didn't stimulate it and get it active, if you did as a youth, good for you, because you're starting from a good base. And what we found is you can supplement it by, when you get a disease, by getting outside. Tuberculosis, the 1918 pandemic, they were just taking people outside and putting them in the sun. They're
totally. I've read about TB sanatoria. I believe Arizona was a primary site of this, because obviously you get a lot of sunlight, and so all these people with TB would actually go to these health resorts or whatever and basically sunbathe nude, and that was the principal cure for TB prior to antibiotics.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Using concentrations of this light was actually won the 1903 Nobel Prize for cutaneous tuberculosis. So we're just going back and saying, okay, here's something systemic. Our evolution has changed. We're inside more. We've, as we said, Australia had the big push with slip, slop, slop, which led to the global opinion that sunlight is evil, as opposed to being revered for thousands of years. But I have to say, Australia is actually now leading the swing back. So we think of it as a pendulum. It got pulled all the way over, and now it's coming back. And there's a national policy statement in Australia about sunlight health and mapping out, like, hey, you should get sunlight you shouldn't burn.
That's right. That's
and
right.
and you don't
Yeah.
need a doctor to tell you when that feeling is coming up.
I think this is such a failing of public health in general, which I saw. I think we all saw writ large during the COVID episode, if I could call it that, which is that the people in charge of public health have such a poor opinion of the intelligence of the average person that they believe that they have to craft these incredibly simplistic messages. Sunlight bad, stay out of it, right? COVID bad, must avoid, must stay inside, as opposed to saying, look, there's a certain amount of sunlight that is good for you. And if you don't get that amount of sunlight, bad stuff will happen. If you go past that point that is good for you, you will burn. This is also bad. And, here are some rough algorithms for how you can figure that out. Or, like you said when we first spoke, you can just see how you feel because most people with 2 functioning brain cells know when they've had enough sun.
Well, I have to tell you right now, Australia is ahead of the U.S. in re-educating. Yeah. So Rachel Neal and her team are very active, and she's also in the article that she's mentioned the work that she's done, and she's detailed by city in Australia in documents like this is about how much sun is the healthy amount to get before you would burn by city, and that's a real positive step, because in the U.S., if we walk around and tell people there's a good amount of sunlight and you tell it to a dermatologist, I mean, there are those that appreciate that what they're doing is beneficial beyond it, but most of them, their brains they were programmed educationally to tell everybody to avoid sunlight at all costs. Hats.
Oh, I can tell you of the dermatologists that I either know of personally, feedback that I've got from clients who've seen them, or that I've heard interviewed in various fora. Dermatologists are all of one mind. Your skin should not see the sunlight. You should apply sunscreen whenever you go out, including in winter, and you should just pop a vitamin D pill to make up for the fact that you're not getting sunlight. Right? That is still the message that is coming out of dermatology. And yeah, I want to come back to the whole issue of vitamin D and sunlight and the confusion that's arisen. I do want to spend a bit of time on that. But yes, this is a great frustration for me. And look, I get it. Most Australians are of Western and Northern European origin, so we're fairer skinned, and we live on a continent that was formerly inhabited by dark skinned people who obviously have some built-in sunscreen. So we do need to be pretty careful. Yes, sunlight exposure definitely does age the skin, and I think some sensible precautions like wearing a hat really need to be taken. But this whole fear that dermatologists have put into people that any amount of sunlight on their skin is bad for them, I think it's terrible. And I'm glad to hear what you say, that where you see Australians kind of leading the world in getting people to be friends with the sun again. I want it to hurry up.
Yeah. Well, my cousins are, my father's Australian, so my cousins, luckily we're sort of the Black Irish, so we don't burn as bad as our cousins. But I've got cousins, the Egan's are in Warren, sort of 200 miles west of Sydney in the along the Macquarie River. And, we visited there, and there's a lot of sunlight. I mean, you're on another scale of intensity than we are here in the U.S. But that pendulum is really swinging back. And thank you for giving us a forum to talk to your patients about it, about the fundamentals. So there's a considered a rogue dermatologist because he thinks sunlight is good, Richard Weller out of Edinburgh, and he and I and Prue have met at different conferences around the world talking about this topic, and he's a lot of fun. He's hilarious, right? So, but he's pointed out he's asked every dermatologist to say, hey, is sunlight, bad for you? And the fact of the matter is, there is not a study in the world that sunlight will reduce your mortality. And they're like, no, that can't be true. Sunlight's bad. You're going to get sunspots. You're at risk of melanoma. They're like, no, if you burn really bad, you're at risk of those things.
That's right.
If you, from data from 3 different countries that have socialized medicine, so they have good records, and Sweden, the Karolinska Institute, started a clinical trial to prove that more sunlight was bad for you. And the results of that trial, called the Melanoma in Southern Sweden trial, 30,000 women followed for now almost 30 years, has shown the opposite.
Yes. I've written about this on my Substack. This is just one of my favorite studies because it just totally blows a hole in the whole sunlight gives you melanoma narrative. Yeah. So as I recall, in that MISS study, the women with the greatest kind of leisure time sun exposure, basically those who intentionally sunbathed, they did have a higher risk of squamous cell and basal cell carcinomas, but they had a lower risk of melanoma. And when they did get melanoma, it was a lower grade. So in other words, it was less minor and more treatable.
And you lived longer, right?
Yes.
So we, like, I grew up on a farm, so I have sunspots, but I earned them, Yeah,
that's right. Yep. And sunspots, I mean, so on the one hand, most of us would like to look younger, and so we do have this photo aging effect of the sun. But on the other hand, the greater sun exposure makes you live longer. So you're going to live longer, but you'll look like you've lived longer. I guess that's the trade-off.
Yeah. And so when we talk about, this is a great segue to what we've really been doing, right? So those are academic studies and research and epidemiological. What we're trying to do is give patients the option to manage their treatment at home and to look to stabilize their immune system. And so and then the big evidence would be a bigger trial. So with Prue and with Richard, we've designed a trial in MS, a randomized first trial, which means you get a placebo for half the time and then you get the real treatment. And that will answer the question, right? So that's, and MS is a smaller patient subset, but long COVID patients have the same inflammatory elevated autoimmune profile. And there's, they talk about like 8 to 10% of the US population has long COVID. So we can talk esoterically and look at these environmental studies. The real answer is if we get the backing for us to go do a fundamental trial in this. And in the meantime, because these are available for psoriasis, vitiligo, and eczema, then patients anywhere can get, if they can get a prescription from their doctor, they can get treated. There you go. So these are all, this is the array of lights provided, built by Cytokind. We're a distributor for them. We're Cytokind. Bothera is the global leader in lights. They're based here in the US. They sell by the name Davlin in Australia. The Australian UV group, we send patients to them couple times a month, and they come in a 4 and a 6 foot, what's convenient for you in your space. They all emit the same wavelength of light. The workhorse in all the clinical trials is this 6 foot lamp this woman's standing next to, this 600-4, and you start off like you're going to the beach. You don't want to burn. You do about 40 seconds on the front, 40 seconds on the back. You stand about 9 inches away, so it's about the length of where the feet are on these. And and then you slowly work up to make sure you don't burn. And in a month, you're at about 5 minutes aside, and you're getting only the wavelength of light that resonates with your immune system without that tanning booth orange color, right? You'll look a little healthier, you'll be a little healthier, but you won't look like Richard Hamilton or if you remember that actor. And so that's the opportunity. The patients can say, hey, and who the patients are that have been coming to us in from Australia and around the world, they're patients with multiple sclerosis who know that their fatigue is driven because their organs just won't rest. If they look at their inflammatory profiles, they have all this inflammation. And if you can just calm the inflammation, the organs rest, and then the patient can rest. Right? And so the long COVID patient is another patient that reaches out to us. And Crohn's disease, people that know they have the systemic inflammatory condition. So we know. Go ahead.
That's fascinating because Crohn's, of course, is a gastrointestinal autoimmune disease, and I'm sure most conventional doctors would say, well, what the heck has light got to do with a disease that affects your bowel? But you're saying, yeah, your bowel is affected because of this overactivity of your immune system.
Yeah, and there's some deep, dedicated researchers to the mechanism of light. We call the photoimmune cascade. And we're fortunate to be the ones that are trying to say, let's take your research and get it into therapy, right? These lights are approved. They're available all over the world. They're just stuck in a silo in dermatology, right? And dermatologists look for melanoma. And what dermatologists have shown after 20 years is these lights don't change the risk of melanoma.
That's so important.
Which is just sort of hard for them to say. But the benefits are there, the risks are low. And we're just, we're so fortunate to be able to help patients get these lights, find out. And we talked to them, I said, are your symptoms seasonal? Right? That's a first question, right? I'm not an MD, but I can handle that question, right? Are your symptoms seasonal? Are you doing any tracking of biomarkers that look at inflammation? Not just your regular blood panel, right? But are you looking a little deeper? Because that's the work that we've done. So to really see that that this therapy is stabilizing the immune system. And a stable immune system makes better choices.
And it's more adaptive. It's not treating absolutely everything as a threat, whether that be the kind of hypersensitivity to threat that you see in allergic type diseases, or the hypersensitivity, the sort of immune cross-reactivity that you often see in autoimmune conditions, where the immune system is attacking the person's own tissue as if it was some kind of, biological disease vector.
Yeah. So the allergy, I forget the anagram for them here in the US, but the Allergy Society uses this to treat allergic reactions, to sort of prime the skin to be ready for stimulus. So it's and expectations for patients. So there's a number that my colleagues will say I'm fixated on, and now you can say that I'm fixated on it too, because I am. Nice mug, by the way. Is that an owl?
It's a fox.
A fox.
Isn't it cool? I love it.
Okay, so the number I'm fixated on. So we are comfortable that we are the global concentration of any trial that's been done using narrowband UVB that's out there. We've aggregated it, we've looked at it. What to expect for a patient is 60% of the patients are going to respond very well. 20% are going to do good, and 20% are going to be non-responders. And that's across, and we don't know why, but that is something there to teach us, right? So that's across psoriasis, vitiligo, our own COVID study, 60% reduction in mortality, not 100, not 20, 60 right on the dot. We're like, that number
Absolutely. So there's some other component that perhaps makes people less responsive to light. Maybe there's something even further upstream of the point of view.
Well, if we could identify it, maybe we could help the 20% that are doing good become great. We could screen the 20% that aren't going to be respond, or we'll learn something, right? So that's the power. Like, we've got all the scientists primed for us to get more clinical data, but it's an affordable therapy. So investors are like, don't you have something really expensive?
Make money out of people suffering. Come on.
By chance, I have here. So this is the article, and I have it showing backwards on your screen, but I can't make it backwards. This is the article that really changed things for us. So we've done lots of academic research, and this author, Rowan Jacobson, interviewed all the folks in the field. He'd previously done an expose on sunscreen like 6 years ago, saying, I don't buy that these things are all good for us. I know that's a hot topic in Australia. He wrote this article, and instead of just academic interest, hundreds, close to 1,000 patients since then have reached out directly to us from all over the world about, hey, I have a condition that what I'm taking now is not managing, or I'm stopped taking it because of the side effects. I want to give it a shot. And the funnest ones are people that have called in and said, 6 weeks ago, I read your article. I've been going out noon and laying out in the sun for 6 weeks. I'm doing better. Winter's coming. I want to buy a light. And
I'm glad you mentioned
great
this.
Story. What's that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned this, because after we spoke the first time, I was racking my brains trying to figure out how on earth I had come across your website, your company. You mentioned the Scientific American article, and I thought, I've seen that. That is how I got to you. How did I find that? It took me a little bit until I figured out that I'd read an article. I suppose I might as well mention who it was by. It was by James Corbett, who's a Canadian independent journalist, let's say. And he'd actually written this article called Extra Sunlight is Good for You. And it was a very sarcastic article about how, the genius boffins have figured out that sunlight is good for you. He'd mentioned the Scientific American article, and I clicked through, and of course it's behind a paywall, so I got around that using Archive. And so I was able to read the whole thing, and that's how I came across you. Yes, I cheated the paywall. Anyway, but the article was, it did have a sarcastic tone. It was kind of like, oh, can you believe this? These people are trying to make money by creating an ersatz version of something you can get for free. Okay, fair enough. But as you just said, people who live in latitudes that are further from the equator don't actually have access to that free resource year round. So I love the fact that you said, people read that article and they just went out in the sun, and they got UVB and all the other wavelengths that are in the visible and the invisible spectrum. They got that absolutely for free. And then they realized, oh, winter is coming. I can't get this anymore. Is there a way that I can continue to enjoy these benefits even throughout the winter?
So once again, leading from the literature I've read, the I don't know if scam is the right word or bullshit or whatever you would say, but the testing that's going on sunscreens in Australia just show that they're not only are they not providing what it says on the bottle, but they're just not that. You're covering yourself in all these chemicals, right? And they're saying every single person needs to do this every single day. Now that is something to write a satirical paper about. So what we're talking about here in the U.S. as of last year, a few months ago, one of the big insurance companies, because they sort of dictate what we get here, the fourth that we know of has said, if you have psoriasis, vitiligo, or eczema, we will send you these lights, these same lights we're talking about, for free to your house.
Wow.
You know why?
Heck of it indoors.
Is because, and they cover 80 million patients now, so it's like 20% of the U.S. population has access to these lights free of charge if they have psoriasis, vitiligo, or eczema, right?
Yeah. Was this Kaiser or Blue Cross Blue Shield?
It's Kaiser, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Anthem, Elevance, and Cigna.
Whoa. Okay. Yep.
Those are the ones that are publicly stated.
Yeah.
And the reason is the drugs, patients are happy at guess what percentage at the end of 1 year? Patients that get these lights for free don't go on to a biologic. What percentage of them at 1 year are happy with the lights completely and don't need a drug?
Well, I'm going to guess from what you said before, 60%.
60%, almost right on the nose.
Okay.
Boom, 60% again. So 60% of the patients did not need an $80,000 drug.
Yeah.
And you know what? Next year, they would need that $80,000 drug. And the year after that, $80,000. So the insurance companies these are 5% of the price of the drug. And and next year, they're 100% less than the price of the drug because you don't need them.
And I think it's even more than that, because then what other conditions does Humira cause that then require more drugs to be prescribed, more hospital visits, more visits to the specialist?
I'm not an expert on that, but I know Kaiser published that study. And all the other insurance companies said, oh, well, this is good for patients and good business. Let's do it. And what our message, and we met with the FDA, is we need to get this into MS, pediatric MS, and look at it as an autoimmune therapy. The signal is strong as a steroid, right? So this is, thank you for putting this up. So this is work we did in collaboration with Prue Heart. So Prue heard what we were doing in COVID, and she had done the biggest trial in MS, and she had biobanked blood samples from the 2018 trial, and she sent them to us. And our U.S. government paid for us to analyze those as well. And we then did this. This is specific inflammatory profiles for MS. It's a busy slide, but this is from her trial in Perth, and the how to summarize it. In this randomized, you got your MS care, or you got your best MS care, and the other group got MS care plus went to the dermatologist, right? Got treated with these lights. Their relapse rate went down, their quality of life went up, their fatigue went down. And then this was a recent addition we analyzed of the biobank samples, shows that the number of patients who had had high disease activity, if I could point. I'm pointing with my slide, but I don't know if it's showing.
No, it's
It's on the right. So if you're in the red on the right, there's two bunch. There's the control patients that were treated for 3 months, and the narrowband UVB treatments got the same plus the lights. There's a 56 there, a big red block. That's where they started. 56% of the patients had.
The patients who were randomly assigned to receive the UVB therapy, they actually came into the trial kind of worse off than the patients in the control group. Is that right?
Slightly. It's certainly worse off than the baseline. That was just random, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That happens even with good randomization. Yeah.
The signal is sort of the day 0 to day 90, right?
Totally.
And in the control patients, they got worse, red being worse.
Yes.
And
so from 25% with high multiple sclerosis disease activity, so from 25% up to 56%, and big trend in the reverse for the group given the UVB.
Yeah, so the UVB group started at 56 and went to 11.
Yeah.
All right. So now you say to yourself, okay, what is red, green, blue? Well, if you're in the red group, you have a 20 times higher risk of having a new brain lesion form if you're in the yellow or green. So that matters to patients. New lesions are the metric for disease progression. And the fundamental proteomics inflammatory profile was exactly what we would hope for. It's the neuroinflammation came down. The myelin damage came down. Yeah. And so these patients, just by getting treated minutes, these patients only got treated 3 times a week because it was at the clinic. Now we're giving these lights at home. You can treat yourself 7 times a week.
Yes, every day.
And you can take this test. This is now the most accurate test in the world for MS disease activity. And the therapeutic delivery of the light fundamentally improves the patient's condition.
And what you're saying is that through using this blood test for proteomic activity, you don't have to wait to do, say, serial MRIs, because if you're only doing an MRI every 6 months, every 12 months, whatever, there's a long lag time before the effect of any kind of disease-modifying therapy is going to actually show up as a new lesion on an MRI or whatever. What you're saying is you can run these blood tests and you can kind of track things in real time. But there is a correlation between the proteomic profile that you see from the blood test and the occurrence of new lesions.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? So this is a validated assay. The only validated, and the reason is, and when we talk about the challenges for autoimmune patients, is there's no single biomarker that says this is the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
And so this group this is Octave Biosciences. There's a spin out of Genentech, some smart folks. They said, okay, there's just not one thing. We're not going to look at one thing. We're going to start with 1,000 biomarkers and see where the biology is imprinted on these MS patients.
Yeah.
And then they validated it to new lesions. So the long-term opportunity is you don't need an MRI, you just need this blood test. And we saw statistical significance in 20 patients. The signal is so strong, and it's especially strong the worse you are, right? We did super sick COVID. The Mayo Clinic does super sick graft versus host, which has a graft versus host, which is from a stem cell transplant. Your body's rejecting, hasn't decided who's going to win in your immune system. And in this, the signal is, it's just beautiful. And And we're trying to tell that story. And I'm so glad, Robin, that you let us tell us to my relatives in Australia and to listeners worldwide.
Oh, I'm so grateful that you made the time to speak to me today. And I'm just gonna flash that Scientific American article as well, in case anyone wants to track that down. And so I see you've also had some media attention in the US. And that, so the missing link, that's an MS program, or a program for MS patients, I'm assuming.
It's a woman with MS that's also a physical therapist, and so she was introducing it to them. Apple News, and then I don't know, the rest of the team's going to get mad at me. You can learn more at cytokind.net, www.cytokind.net. I don't know if you'll put that in the show notes, but
I will put that in the show notes for sure. And so I've already kept you a little longer than I promised. But could I briefly finish with two questions / I don't know, thoughts. One I referred to before, which is I would call it a confusion between vitamin D and sunlight exposure. And the reason I'm calling it a confusion is because so many people, including doctors and other practitioners, seem to think that vitamin D is kind of like the only relevant photo product. And you mentioned before that there are actually, God knows how many, definitely thousands of other photo products. Where has medical research gone astray, would you say, in chasing after vitamin D as being the disease-modifying agent? I think, yeah, that's the way I'd put it.
Yeah. Well, so when we started looking at trying to separate the two ourselves, we thought, well, we should run a study where we give people vitamin D and we give people Narrowband UVB. But then we found a trial done by the Rockefeller Hospital that Dr. Panda did it with patients with metabolic syndrome. And he showed that their vitamin D levels came up and their immune profiles stabilized on those with narrowband UVB and marginally got worse on vitamin D supplements. So they did metabolic syndrome. So, vitamin D is in the cholesterol family and a steroid. So they were looking at patients to see how it might change the LDL and HDL profiles. So they treated patients, they gave them supplements, or you got narrowband UVB, right? Which is like, well, that should help us tell the answer, right? So they didn't substantially, and they did 100 patients total. They didn't substantially change the metabolic profile, but they did GSEA hallmark profiling of the immune system before and after. They did it in the skin and they did it in the serum. Very thoughtful, for the nerds in you, like good data. And it showed that the immune profile, and I can send you the paper, the Panda paper. Immune profile stabilized in the narrowband UVB patients in the serum, right? Because that's where we want it to be. The skin is just communicating, right? You got to get into the lymphatic system, into your marrow. Your lymph systems are assigning the jobs to your immune system. Right? They talk about naive cells, and then they get a memory. Then they've got a job, and it showed that using a GSE, a gene set EA, I forget what the GSEA hallmark set, that the immune profile was stabilizing significantly in the narrowband UVB patients and not in the vitamin D supplement patients.
Yeah. Do you know what this reminds me of, John? the Finnish smokers trial. The results of this study broke when I was in naturopathic college, year 1, year 2, somewhere in the late 90s anyway. And the Finnish smokers trial was based on an observation that smokers who had higher levels of beta carotene in their bloodstream were less likely to develop lung cancer. And so, rather than developing more effective measures to help smokers quit smoking, what these researchers decided to do is to randomize smokers to receive either a placebo or a beta carotene supplement. And the trial was terminated early because it was found that the people who continued to smoke and took a beta carotene supplement actually had a higher risk of lung cancer than the smokers who were taking a placebo. And the news of that study really had a profound effect on me. I mean, I was already in naturopathic college and learning, a much more holistic view of health, but it was such an emblematic example of how medicine has its head rammed up its rear end. So in other words, why would smokers with higher serum levels of beta carotene, why would they have a lower risk of lung cancer? Because they eat freaking fruits and vegetables. Okay, that's how they ended up with high beta carotene levels. Now, what else did they have? They also had a higher intake of alpha carotene and lutein, zeaxanthin, and fiber, and all these other things that you get in fruits and vegetables. And just giving them a pill with beta carotene, this one member of this vast family of carotenoids, let alone all the other active constituents in fruits and vegetables, did not have the effect, surprise, surprise, of eating the freaking fruits and vegetables. So anyway, that's what your story reminds me of. It's like, oh, we're just going to get this one thing. We're going to get this one thing, and which is a consequence of going out in the sun. And we're going to assume that you will get all the other benefits of going out in the sun.
It would have been great if it was true, right? So it just hasn't turned out to be that way. I want to personally thank you, because one of the things you point out in that anecdote is, in the U.S. and globally, like you don't need a prescription in the U.K., by the way. So people in Scotland and you can just order a light. So not all countries require a prescription. U.S. and Australia does. Your background is a naturopath. What we see in the patients that reach out to us and the doctors that support their request for a prescription is the fact that the naturopathic community often sees people who have been unsatisfied and are falling through the cracks in the Western medicine, the pharmaceutical track, right? And either from a symptoms management or a cost, or wanting to be conservative. But your discipline, your approach to look broader and what we call translational applications, that we're just advocating what the dermatologists know. They just don't seem to want to tell anybody that they get these great results, because they're so indoctrinated to say that sunlight's bad.
Yes.
They're sitting on all of the best data, and we're just presenting it because we're just looking at the data. Like, that data is awesome. We should tell everybody.
Yeah. And again, I see this very much as being a paradigm. So dermatology has imbibed and then transmitted the message, sunlight is bad, you should protect your skin from sunlight. And so even when they have access to data that shows beyond a shadow of a doubt, look, UVB light is really, really good for these conditions. It's great for psoriasis, it's great for eczema. It's like they can't even see that. Or, oh, look, we can see it, but surely it can't be applicable to all this other stuff.
Well, we hope there's a new generation that's going to come through and question that paradigm. And we're optimistic, and very likely could come out of Australia before they do in the US. But whoever you are, reach out to us. We'll just put all the data on the table in front of you, and the doctors can decide what they want to do with it. But the the biggest the real final story in vitamin D as a supplement was a trial that published called the VITAL trial out of Harvard. And we talked to the PI, Dr. Manson, and she's done a video report. So cover story, New England Journal of Medicine, maybe $100 million in trial. 25,000 patients, placebo randomized control, either got vitamin D or vitamin D plus fish oil to eat versus placebo. 25,000 patients, no benefit. And she said in her video talk that she did with the New England Journal of Medicine, she said, maybe you should go outside. I'm like, yeah. Now, it would have been great if we could make everybody as good as the promise of vitamin D. The reality is you got to get it a different way. There's so much more. So there's nitric oxide, that lowers your blood pressure. Your blood pressure is lower in the summer. There's tryptophan, that makes you feel good. Serotonin, I think about those as biofeedback. That makes you stay in the sun. Your body's like, hey, let's stick around.
It feels good. Yeah.
Like wasabi. Like who would think you'd want more wasabi after you had one? But it's a huge endorphin releaser. And so your brain says, go get some more sushi. You're like, really? Yeah, go get them. So these natural, and Prue Hart as an immunologist is really the resource on it. She's one of the top immunologists in Australia and leading immunologist in this field. And a pleasure to work with. Australia should be very proud of her.
I'm hoping to speak to her very soon. Yeah. So I guess the moral of the story is you can't cheat Mother Nature by just popping a vitamin D pill and assuming that you've got all the benefits. But you can augment Mother Nature if you happen to live in a part of the world where you're actually quite deprived of sunlight and its benefits for a good chunk out of every year. Or, in the case of MS patients, many of them are actually quite heat sensitive. And so going out in the sun can make them feel a lot worse. And so in that case, having the UVB, which doesn't actually, heat them up, is a really useful solution to that problem. Again,
I'm sorry to interrupt there. In the U.S., most of the patients are in the northern part of the U.S. Then they're near coastal and foggy regions. So Seattle, Portland, all around the Great Lakes, Chicago, New York, Syracuse, New York, highest in the country. Right? They get the cover, which also reduces the UV. Right, so sunlight at latitude within the clouds. But in the U.S., one of the first things a doctor will tell a patient that gets MS is, can you move south?
Yes.
Can you just put yourself in an area where you're going to get drier, better sunlight? You got to manage your heat. That's a huge thing for MS patients. And then Dr. Weller, he's going to love that I'll close with a remark from him. He thinks that the UK you should have a tax deduction for going, to southern France in the winter as part of your health program. That it's that profoundly helpful. He's mapped out by latitude how in the UK, which Australia has a lot of latitude, how much longer you'll live, just your life expectancy based on latitude. So he loves this topic. If you guys want to dig in further, Prue and him are would make a.
All right, I think I want to speak to him too. Okay, and just one final thought / question, possibly research direction for you. You mentioned the unresponsive patients, and what that immediately brought to mind for me is research on the impact of the gut microbiome on the efficacy of chemotherapy and in particular immunotherapy. So immunotherapy has been quite revolutionary in treating certain cancers, including melanoma, but there is a segment of the patient population that is quite non-responsive to immunotherapy. And what has been found is that their microbiome profile is really different. And so it looks like gut microbiome, sorry, just to be very specific, gut microbiome modification might be a game changer to help immunotherapy work better. And so what I wonder is there a correlation between the non-responsive segment of your psoriasis, well, all your patient groups that you've spoken about so far, is there a correlation between their gut microbiome and their non-responsiveness, and could that be modified? And then the further step from there is what is the connection between sunlight exposure, its effects on the skin microbiome, and through that the effects on the gut microbiome? So that actually just sounds like a really interesting research direction to me, in case you hadn't explored that.
Well, Richard, there'll be an article coming out by Richard, and he's presented the data, so I can mention the global topic. But he's looked at health, he's looked at blood pressure, he's looked at all these things. He's teamed up with the Biobank in the UK, 50,000 patients, serial blood draws, and he's going to be talking about cancer survival based on your prevalence and survival based on your UV exposure, environmental UV. So that's just where you are. We're talking about then proactively getting more naturally, hitting the tropics, going to Townsville for a week, that I would burn up. And then we're just providing the opportunity for people to get it in their own home. MS patients, Alzheimer's, ALS, patients with high inflammatory burdens and low mobility, right? So you don't need, MS patient very often needs a care provider with them because they don't know when their fatigue is going to hit them or they're going to have an episode. So their world gets smaller, right? So we're offering this to those patients. You can have it in your home, treat yourself as needed, get some dignity in your therapy, and get some control. And we look forward to hearing from anybody that wants to learn more or how they can really help push this. The Telethon Kids group out of Perth, speak the world to them to collaborate with us. And donate those blood samples, and hopefully we've done some good with them.
Oh, you absolutely have. So I'll put all those links in the show notes. I really do encourage people to get in touch with you directly and discuss whether their condition might benefit from using one of these lights. So generally what you would say is, when you can avail yourself of nature's free resource, sunlight, go outside and get some. And then if either because of where you live or your physical condition, you're limited in getting access to that free resource, or there's months out of every year when you really just can't, that's when your the lights that you make for home use come in. And was there anything else that that we haven't discussed so far that you'd like to get out there just in our final minutes?
No, I just really want to thank you and your patients for giving us an opportunity to talk about this. The patients the characteristic patients we hear from, I suspect, are your patients. These are patients that are seeking, they're being advocates for themselves, right? When we get an FDA approval or THA approval, TGA approval, then we can speak broader, because the mainstream doctors would be prescribing it. But to the folks that are out there listening, thank you for being proactive. one of the things that we know about immunology is we hardly know anything about it.
Yeah, that's
And
so
we're on
true.
the forefront. So
Yeah.
listen to your body. If you go outside and you feel better, you be an N=1. Say, hey, I want to try and to do this, and we'd love to hear that even that's a success for you, because it matters, right? Then the message is getting out there. So, Robin, thank you, and I hope your listeners get something out of it. It's been a lot of fun this evening.
Oh, I absolutely know they will. Thank you so much. You've been incredibly generous with your time and your experience, and yeah, I really hope a lot of people are reaching out to you to learn more. All right. Thanks so much, John.
Thank you, Robin. Cheers.